In 1970s America, people did not understand fear the way we do today. Doors were not locked at night. Children played freely in the streets. When a stranger smiled, people smiled back. Clowns especially symbolized trust. Colorful clothes, red noses, laughter. In a child's world, they represented joy, not fear. But America, without realizing it, made one of the darkest mistakes in its history. Because it trusted a clown. This documentary is not just the story of a serial killer. It is the story of how a society was deceived, how evil can appear ordinary, and it asks us one question: how long can a monster live as a human? The name John Wayne Gacy is an irony by itself. John Wayne was a name associated with strength, masculinity, and heroism in America. But one day, that name would be remembered with shame. Gacy knew how to present himself. He was talkative, persuasive. He could look people in the eye and make them feel safe. But that safety was not real. It was a mask, carefully built over years. Most people who knew him later said, "We never suspected him." That sentence is what made John Wayne Gacy so dangerous. Born in Chicago in 1942, John Wayne Gacy grew up in a home where love was rare. There was fear. There was silence. And there was anger, always ready to explode. His father was authoritarian and an alcoholic. The atmosphere in the house changed according to his father's mood. Sometimes quiet, sometimes violent. As a child, John learned one thing very early: if you make a mistake, you will be punished. But these punishments were not only physical. The deepest wounds came from humiliation. Gacy's father constantly questioned his masculinity. He called him weak, belittled him, and often beat him. For a child, a father's approval is everything. But John never received it. Every slap, every insult, broke something inside him. According to psychologists, this type of childhood creates suppressed anger, loss of empathy, a deep need for control. John Wayne Gacy had all three. His mother saw the violence at home. But most of the time, she remained silent. That silence taught John his most important lesson: when you suffer, no one comes. This feeling later became the psychological foundation of his crimes, because a mind that feels abandoned eventually disconnects from humanity. John was lonely as a child. And that loneliness slowly turned into darkness. Gacy's childhood was not only psychologically difficult, but physically as well. He frequently fainted and collapsed without warning. Doctors could not give a clear diagnosis. Because of these episodes, he fell behind in school. He couldn't play sports. He was labeled weak. For his father, this was unacceptable. A son was supposed to be strong. And John wasn't. Experts say long-term health issues in children often create feelings of inadequacy, accumulated internal anger. John's anger was quiet, but it was growing. School was not an escape for John Wayne Gacy. It was another hell. Classmates mocked him. His physical weakness, introverted nature, and different demeanor made him an easy target. During these years, John learned something crucial: the strong ones win. But he wasn't strong. At least not physically. So he searched for another kind of power. Not physical. Mental. Manipulation. Adolescence was the most confusing period of Gacy's life. He was trying to understand his identity, but the society he lived in did not allow it. He had emotions he suppressed. Shame. Fear. This suppression eventually turned into self-hatred. Anger toward others. A desire for control. Psychology defines this clearly: a suppressed identity eventually explodes. John's explosion would come years later. Gacy's first crimes were not major. But they were important. Because he got away with them. Was not punished. Was not taken seriously. This created a very dangerous thought in his mind: I can do this, and face no consequences. For a serial killer, the greatest trigger is the first act without punishment. John Wayne Gacy experienced that early. And that meant the boundaries were gone. The first murder is a turning point for most serial killers. It was the same for Gacy. Before that moment, he had fantasized, imagined control, experienced power only in his mind. But imagination was no longer enough. He needed reality. The first victim was not a human being to him, but an experiment. And after that moment, Gacy realized something terrifying. He felt pleasure, not fear. There was no turning back. After the first murder, something strange happened in Gacy's life. He did not fall apart. He did not panic. Instead, he became more organized. During the day, he went to work, shook hands, smiled. At night, he became someone else. Psychology defines this clearly: a divided life. Gacy was now two people: John, loved by society; John, seen by no one. And the second John was growing stronger. John Wayne Gacy started his own business. He made money. This gave him more than financial power, it gave him a sense of immunity. People do not suspect rich, successful men. Gacy knew this very well. He had employees, young men. Many admired him. That admiration would later become his most powerful weapon, because trust is the strongest trap. Gacy was not only a businessman. He was also involved in politics. Meetings, donations, photographs. He stood beside authorities. These images acted as a shield. In the subconscious of a police officer, a thought formed: this man is important. That perception saved him for years. This is where Gacy's most infamous mask appeared. Pogo the Clown. Colorful costume, painted face, exaggerated laughter. When Gacy became Pogo, he stepped into another role. A role that seemed innocent, entertaining, harmless. But the truth was, this mask existed to hide the darkness. Many experts believe the clown costume was not used to hide himself, but to free himself. Gacy's victims were not random. He chose them carefully. Usually, young, financially struggling, trying to survive. These people were not immediately searched for. Their disappearances were not urgent. Gacy saw the gaps in the system, and he moved within those gaps. This chapter reveals a harsh truth: this is not just a serial killer story, this is the story of those society ignored. From the outside, John Wayne Gacy's house looked ordinary. A tidy yard, a quiet neighborhood, neighbors. But that house was not a home. It was a center of control. When the door closed, the world closed with it. The young men who entered did not know that. Inside that house, there was no escape, no help, no chance. The walls were silent, but fear was everywhere. For Gacy, the house was a stage, and he was the only actor in control. His most infamous method was presented as a game, a trick, a joke, handcuffs. He framed it as entertainment. But the key never came out. At that moment, Gacy's face changed. The smile disappeared. A cold calm replaced it. That moment meant everything to him: absolute control. A defenseless body. Total dominance. From that point on, the person in front of him was no longer human. Just something to be silenced. As the murders increased, Gacy's biggest problem became the bodies. And his solution was unimaginable. The crawl space beneath the house. The soil was dug. Bodies were placed. Covered. Over time, foul smells began to rise. Neighbors noticed. Complaints were made. Each time, Gacy had an excuse: sewage, moisture, dead animals. And each excuse was accepted. Beneath that house lay over 30 lives. Dozens of unfinished futures. Silently buried. The smells grew worse. The neighborhood was disturbed. But the real problem was this: the authorities did not look deep enough. There was negligence. There was bias. There was the belief that this man is respectable. The cost of that neglect was enormous. If it had been taken seriously earlier, if someone had said stop, many young men might still be alive. This is the most painful part of the documentary. Because the crime does not belong only to Gacy. In 1978, a missing young man changed everything. This time, the traces could not be hidden. Suspicion grew. And shovels hit the ground. When the truth was uncovered, America froze. One house. One neighborhood. 33 lives. John Wayne Gacy was arrested. He stood trial. And he was executed. But the story did not end there. Because some victims are still unnamed. Some families are still waiting for answers. And one question remains: how could a monster live among us for so long? John Wayne Gacy was a clown. A businessman. A volunteer. And also a killer. This documentary reminds us of one thing: evil does not always scream. Sometimes it smiles. True fear is not in the dark, it is among people. Now we turn to the victims, the stories of 7 young men. Timothy McCoy. Timothy was 15 years old. Quiet. Introverted. Harmless. Gacy met him at a bus terminal. It was cold. It was night. And Timothy had no money to get home. Gacy offered to help. This is considered one of Gacy's first murders. What happened that night opened a door in his mind that could never be closed. Timothy's death was not planned. Began with loss of control. But revealed something horrifying to Gacy. Violence gave him a sense of power. After this murder, Gacy did not stop. He began. John Butkovich. John was 17 years old. He worked for Gacy's company. Young. In need of money. And demanding what he was owed. He went to Gacy's house one last time. He never came back. This was not a sudden crime. It was a conscious act of control and silencing. His disappearance was not taken seriously for days. Because he was young. He was male. He probably left. This is where the system made one of its first major mistakes. Randy Reffitt. Randy was 18 years old. He was hitchhiking. This was common in the 1970s. People trusted strangers. Gacy seemed trustworthy. The car. The smile. The conversation. Randy's story shows this truth. Sometimes a single yes is the final sentence of a life. His disappearance was barely investigated. He had no strong system behind him. He was just a young man. Samuel Stapleton. Samuel was one of those who entered Gacy's house. That house was no longer a home. It was where trust disappeared. Where control began. Where silence ruled. Samuel's story shows that Gacy's methods were now established. At this point, Gacy was aware. Cold-blooded. Methodical. This had become routine. Michael Bonin. Michael was only 14 years old. One of Gacy's youngest victims. His story is especially heavy. Because childhood ended there. His disappearance was recorded as ran away for a long time. No one searched for a serial killer. This murder reveals society's responsibility. Some children were not considered important enough. Mark Scott. Mark Scott was a quiet young man. Trying to build a life. When his path crossed with Gacy, he didn't know him. He had no way of seeing the danger. His death shows how routine killing had become for Gacy. Human life had turned into an object. William Carroll. William was 16 years old. Young. Vulnerable. When he disappeared, his family went to the police. But they were not taken seriously. This story is not just about a killer, it is about a system. If someone had said stop, if someone had looked earlier, William might be alive today. The common truth: these 7 young men lived different lives, but were pulled toward the same end. Their shared reality was this: trusting the wrong person. And perhaps even more painful, being noticed too late by society. The story of John Wayne Gacy is not only the story of a killer, it is the story of lost young lives. Remembering them, telling their stories, and never forgetting. That is the true purpose of this documentary.